Hello, this is Jay Mitchell, and we are back with another episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have Border Patrol is monitoring U.S. drivers and detaining those with suspicious travel patterns from APnews.com, posted by Nuance Matters, and they added a long-form article on an AP investigation that I would highly recommend to understand the vast expansion of dragnet domestic surveillance being conducted by the federal government. Subsequent intelligence is used to target random individuals simply driving their vehicles based on limited evidence and loose suspicions of wrongdoing, all of course in the name of national security. Fourth Amendment be damned, statist gonna statist. And I agree with that, I personally don't think the U.S. government should be spying on people and especially anyone who they deem to have suspicious travel patterns. But ultimately, the government can justify doing whatever it wants and has the legal monopoly on the use of force to do so. And even though I personally don't care for it, that's just how it is sometimes. Sometimes you just have to deal with that. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have, according to RFK CDC, the lack of evidence is proof that vaccines cause autism. From Axios.com, posted by CH4Locks. And yeah, personally, if you want to, I personally don't believe vaccines cause autism, but if you want to believe that, you should be able to. And yeah, personally, I think the libertarian position is, if you want to take vaccines and think they're the greatest thing ever, you should be able to. And if you want to say don't take vaccines, think they're the worst thing ever, you should be able to. Ultimately, it should be my body, my choice, just like with every other medical issue. And that's my thoughts there. Next, we have, as a Canadian, I not only knew that the Liberal Party, as well as the Progressive Conservatives, Reform, Alliance, New Conservatives, what the WTF they're calling themselves in the future, would disappoint me, but I've known this for years. And that's posted from DMBFF, and that's cross-posted to the anarcho-capitalism subreddit, and that looks like a YouTube video from the Juice Media Honest Government ad. Let's see, Honest Government ad, Watch Out Canada. And yeah, personally, a lot of Americans right now, they always say, "Oh, the grass is greener on the other side of the border." But I would say Canada is an even worse position than the U.S. They've been under control of the Liberal Party now since I think 2015, and the Liberal Party, they might say they're liberals, but modern liberalism really is completely different from classical liberalism. Modern liberals might as well be socialist or communist, and yeah, personally, I think, I don't really care for Trump, but, Canada, I think they just arrested someone for denying the Holocaust. Now, I personally don't think you should deny the Holocaust, but if you want to deny the Holocaust, I think you should be able to. And a lot of Western countries like Canada that say always support free speech will arrest you for your post on social media. And Canada's probably one of the better ones in that regard compared to countries like the UK and Australia. Personally, I think we need to support free speech, even if it's speech you don't agree with. And I definitely do think that Canada, isn't doing that. I think in many ways, I have problems with the U.S., but in many ways, the U.S. is probably one of the most libertarian countries in the world when it comes to free speech, especially since it's enshrined in the Constitution. That's not to say they're perfect on free speech. They did go after the one guy for saying text here to vote for Hillary back in 2016. But, ultimately, I definitely do think that Thanksgiving come up. The one thing that people should be thankful for in the U.S. is that we still have a constitution that supports free speech and freedom of expression, even if the government might not always support that 100% of the time. And it just goes to show you that it could be much worse. Like it could be in Canada, where you can get arrested for social media posts or denying the Holocaust, and it's even worse, as I said earlier, like in the UK or Australia or in continental Europe as well. It's very bad. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have a reasonably intelligent person has a decent chance of getting what somewhat anti-American leftist is on about, posted by DMBFFF, and that's a cross post from the anarcho-capitalism subreddit, and that's a YouTube video from Bad and Empanada Live. You should join ICE. And yeah, personally, if you want to join ICE, I think that's just being an agent of the state. If you want to be a statist bootlicker, just by doing whatever you want to. I personally don't care for ICE. They're just more errand boys for the state that will do their dirty work for them. And yeah, I think the libertarian position is, if instead of ICE, we should have a private militia deporting people, and only violent criminals, not non-violent criminals. But ultimately, ICE is going to deport whoever it feels like, and they have the legal monopoly on the use of force just by doing so, pretty much. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have U.S. hits $38 trillion in debt after the fastest accumulation of $1 trillion outside the pandemic. And then in parentheses, GOP again outdo themselves record deficit growth rates and taxes, put from PBS.org, posted by CH4Locks. And yeah, personally, I think that, the national debt grew countlessly under Biden as well, but Reddit didn't care. But suddenly the orange man comes back into power. Reddit thinks it's the worst thing ever, It's just very much, Reddit only cares about orange man bad. They'll start downplaying the national debt again the second the blue party takes back the reins of the state. But now that the orange man's in power, suddenly it's the most important thing ever. Just like with everything else, they'll always make excuses for their side. We'll always attacking the other side, and that's even true when their side's in power. When Biden was in power, that they still went after Trump. They thought Ron DeSantis was the worst thing ever. Now you don't even hear about that guy anymore because now they've moved back on to Trump. But it just goes to show you that they're always going to go over what their political narratives are, which is my side good, your side bad, and they really think life's that simple. Well, in reality, life is much more complex than that, I would say. But believe whatever you want to, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have top MAGA influencers accidentally unmasked as foreign actors from the DailyBeast.com, posted by Donald Key. And yeah, personally, I think that's how Elon Musk, he recently added a feature to Twitter that you can see what country accounts are based in. And yeah, personally, I do think that's personally why I would say, only trust accounts with faces who are willing to share their real name and face rather than accounts that post anonymously. A lot of the anonymous accounts, both for the left and the right, are from places like India or Pakistan or pretty much anywhere other than the U.S., and that's important to remember as well. Reddit, of course, only cares because some of the MAGA accounts are from foreign countries, but a lot of the woke accounts are from foreign countries as well, and I think that's important to remember. Ultimately, I do think you should have freedom of speech regardless of what country you're in, but just because an account claims to be American doesn't mean they are. Oftentimes they're often from India, it seems. It seems increasingly that Twitter, is mostly just either bots or Indians at this point. And, that's probably Reddit as well at this point. It's either bots or Indians. And, yeah, if they want to, if that's it, who wants to post, I guess that's fine. But, it's always important to take everything with a grain of salt, especially since, you don't know who's on the other end of the keyboard, or if there is anyone on the other end at all, it might just be a bot, as I said earlier. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have the same article posted again for top MAGA influencers accidentally masked as foreign actors, posted by Helpful Feeding. And, as I said, Reddit only cares because it's MAGA influencers, but, there's a bunch of woke influencers as well that were foreign actors, but Reddit doesn't care about that. Next we have Doge disbanded, Elon Musk's cost-cutting project quietly ended, and then in parentheses, Elon scam accomplished nothing promised, from Time.com, posted by CH4Locks. And yeah, personally, I do think the Doge was probably one of the best things of the Trump administration so far. With that being said, the Republican Party might market itself as the party of cutting government, but in reality, they're going to grow the government just like the Democrats will. Maybe you could argue they'll grow at a slower pace, but, you definitely can't argue that they're cutting government, especially since they eliminated Doge, the government efficiency agency, less than a year into Trump's presidency. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have a family of 5 was living off-grid in a remote cabin in central Italy. Then the courts intervened, from CNN, posted by Ninja Lover, and they added Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and her deputy Matteo Salvini have both criticized the court decision. Meloni, who said the removal of the children was alarming, has called the Italian Justice Minister Carlo Nordio over the case, according to her spokesman. And yeah, personally, I think if families want to live off the grid, that's fine. Apparently, the Italian government was concerned because the parents might have been poisoning the children. But ultimately, I think the libertarian position is here. As long as they're keeping to themselves and not forcing anyone else to join in. I think libertarian position is to leave them alone. I personally don't care if they were poisoning their children, but ultimately sometimes children do have to fend for themselves. You can't save everyone, and yeah, that's my thoughts there. That's very much libertarian position. You can't save everyone. Some people need to save themselves, and this is very much a case of that. I think if people want to live off the grid, I think that's a very libertarian lifestyle. But of course Reddit wants everyone on the grid so that they can constantly bully them with their woke propaganda. And that's why I personally don't really care for Reddit. They're just going to bully their all their things, all their lifestyle views onto you. And yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Where Do You Fall in the Libertarian Spectrum, posted by Nuance Matters, and they added, looking to better understand the risk of users active on the sub. I can only include 6 choices. I try to get through a decent range of options. However, drop your answer in a comment, and then they have the poll, and they have the 6 options for anarcho-capitalist, monarchist, classical liberal, moderate libertarian, left libertarian, libertarian socialist, and other. And yeah, personally, I would say I'm more of kind of I'm more of an anarchist. I do think we should have a government, but I think that government should be voluntary rather than forced. If people don't like the government, they should be free to make their own government. And yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. Of course, I think this subreddit's mostly libertarian socialist. I think that's an inherent contradiction. But I do think if people want to do socialism or what they label as socialism and keep it among consenting parties, I think that would be fine. Ultimately, I think people, as long as everyone is involved in consenting, I think that's fine. That's very much how I think the libertarian worldview should be. As long as there's consent, it should be fine. With that being said, there's some parties I think that don't have the ability to consent, like young children. But that's just getting into the weeds of things, I would say. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have U.S. set to label Maduro-tied cartel de los Sols as a terror organization. It's not a cartel per se, from APnews.com, posted by Ninja Lover, and they added more evidence that the U.S. is following Putin's playbook for infiltrating Ukraine, making up pretext for regime change and invasion. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for this cartel, but ultimately, I think the government is gonna label anyone it doesn't like as a terrorist organization, and I think that's very much why terrorism is a very loaded word. It's the state cannot constantly do terrorist actions, but that doesn't count since they're the state. But when an individual does it, it's terrorism. When the state does it, it's law. But when an individual does it, it's terrorism. Very much pirates and emperors, as I've gone into in the past. And yeah, personally, I don't think the U.S. should be doing regime change in Venezuela. I don't know if they're going to ever boots on the ground since the Iraq War is such a failure. I think that might take a more while. But, I definitely do think, the U.S. Should be up to the Venezuelan people to decide their directory of the government rather than the U.S. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Most Americans Think Free Speech is on the Decline. Survey finds from Reason.com, posted by Jedi Porcupine. And yeah, I would agree with that, Increasingly, people only support free speech when it's speech they agree with. Both of the major parties might market themselves as free speech, but the left, when they were in power, said, "Oh, we have to censor all hate speech and misinformation." And now that the right's back in power, they're saying, "Oh, we have to censor anyone who says misinformation." Like they tried to censor Jimmy Kimmel. I personally don't care for Jimmy Kimmel. I think he's very much a DNC propaganda circle jerk like Reddit. But ultimately, I do think everyone should still have free speech. With that being said, of course, a lot of people don't care for free speech. Look what they did to Charlie Kirk. He was just using his free speech, and they killed him. So you have to remember that as well. And yeah, so I personally think you need to support free speech, even if it's speech you disagree with, because if they can come for any speech, they can come for your speech. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Of course, that's a big reason why I do this podcast. They banned me from the subreddit over a year ago, and of course now they're saying, oh, free speech is very important. But these are the Reddit moderators and Redditors in general are the same hypocrites when it comes to free speech. They'll censor you for any dissent at all, and like they did for me. And that's why, you gotta use your free speech while you still have it, because, they're just trying to censor you, even if they still mark themselves as being for free speech. If they want to censor me, I think they should have the freedom of association do so, but don't pretend you support free speech when you censor someone just for saying things you don't like. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Judge dismisses case against James Comey and Letitia James after finding prosecutor was unlawfully appointed, from NBCNews.com, posted by Donald Key. And yeah, I don't really care for either of those two people, but ultimately, I do think it was mostly a political attack job. But the Democrats, they're not one to speak on that, because they went after Trump with a political attack job as well, attack trial as well, and that trial actually managed to get a lot farther than either of these two trials did. So I think that's important to remember as well. It's very much that the state is going to use its power to go after political opponents, even if I think it's a lot of WWE stuff as well. I think Trump's more of controlled opposition than anything, and even if they did use the courts to go after him, I think it might have just been theater, because, he's just going to do whatever the Uniparty wants, even if he might market himself as an outsider and not part of the establishment. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Kelly Meyer. Southcom is restricting limiting leave over the Thanksgiving, Christmas holidays in preparation for possible land strikes in the next 10 days to 2 weeks, I'm told by a source. Posted by LegioX, and that's a tweet from Kelly Meyer News. I guess maybe they're gonna invade Venezuela soon. I personally think that might just be hype right now, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. I personally don't think I think Trump knows that the Iraq War was very damaging to the GOP with the constant boots on the ground, people dying, and it ended up resulting in a lot of them losing a lot of support. And I definitely think that's why I don't think he's going to go through with an invasion of Venezuela. But I definitely do think maybe there might be some bombings, but I definitely don't think there'll be boots on the ground. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have U.S. State Agency cancels October inflation report as Fed considers whether to cut rates. In parentheses, that bad A from TheGuardian.com, posted by CH4Locks, and that's cross-post from the inflation subreddit. And yeah, personally, I think people shouldn't be overly relying on government data, because the government can ultimately censor any of its own data if it feels like it, and this is an example of that. So I think the libertarian position is we should have public inflation or private inflation reporting rather than public inflation reporting, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Scoops. Democrats eye ranked choice voting for 2028 primaries from Axios.com, posted by CH4Locks, and that's cross-post from the NFBTP subreddit. And yeah, personally, I think ranked choice voting is probably better than first past the post voting. But the Democrats only support it because they think they think it will benefit them. But in reality, I think ranked choice voting, just like first past the post voting, is just going to result in a uniparty dictatorship like we have currently, pretty much. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Trump to announce extension of ACA tax credits for 2 years, from the Independent.com, posted by Dr. Who 07. And yeah, personally, I think if he wants to do that, that's fine. I personally think all taxation is theft. So if you don't want to pay taxes, you should be forced to do so if you don't feel like it, like with everything else that involves consent. I personally don't care for the American Care Act, or also known as Obamacare. I think that's very much the worst parts of private health insurance and the worst parts of public health insurance put together. But, ultimately, the government's going to justify what it justifies, and that's true regardless of which branch of the uniparty is in power. And next we have, I think that's it for the Libertarian Uncensored post. But I have a post I wanted to do, I did to the Libertarian Party USA subreddit as well. I said libertarian perspectives on quote-unquote banned books. And I said, I feel like a lot of what progressive marketers quote-unquote banned books aren't really banned. Rather, they're just removed from the school libraries for a variety of reasons such as overflow. School libraries only have a finite amount of space, and age appropriateness issues. Case in point, I went to Goodwill today and got 2 Garfield books that used to belong to the school library. You can still see the stickers on the cover, but were probably removed for overflow reasons. Either that or because John indecently exposed himself off panel in one of the strips. According to progressive writers, what constitutes these will constitute banned books, even though I face no legal punishment for owning them. That's simply because they were removed from a school library. It's very much difficult to argue with them, since they constantly find ways to misrepresent arguments in favor of their narratives. Though I guess that is par for the course when it comes to social media as a whole. Thoughts, and that's my thoughts there. Ultimately, I think the libertarian position is, if a book is removed from a school library, it doesn't necessarily mean it's banned. If you want to read it, you're still able to. And I think I said this in a comment, but I think the root of the problem lies in the fact that that we have state-run schools and libraries in the first place. If all schools and libraries were private, they could remove whatever books they want without issue, but since they are public, people are always trying to use the state to control them. And that's my thoughts on that issue. So I'm going to see if there's anything new post on the Libertarian Search. It looks like there isn't, so I think we're going to wrap up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.